I get to say good afternoon because I think it is afternoon already. So what I'm going to talk about today is actually something that is near and dear to our hearts, and that is this whole notion of AI. But I also want to put it in context because some of you may or may not know, eGain is actually one of the oldest AI companies around. It's been around for over 2 decades. And so when you are addressing this recent phenomenon, this recent elevation of interest around AI, people have a very limited notion of what goes into AI because these days it's all about machine learning. What we like to see in context is that there's a whole history behind it that hopefully will give you an idea of how broad this topic is and how widely applicable the offerings that we have could be for your business, okay? So I'm going to touch on exactly what we actually have in our offerings that makes AI, that makes a virtual assistant effective and useful for you. But primarily I'm here to help you think through this process, okay? Because I'm just trying to get a sense of hands. How many of you have heard enough through your own research or through what you've heard today to know, I need it, I'm going to go get it, I'm ready to start an AI project? How many people are in that situation? I don't see very many hands, okay? So this is in that 4% that Brian was talking about earlier today. How many are on the other side? That you know that because of your particular application, your domain or whatever, you're not at all ready. Your company is not at all ready to talk about AI or chatbots or virtual assistants. Any in that particular camp? Okay, good. So you're here in the middle trying to think through what are the important factors. What do you need to actually learn from eGain to actually make that critical decision to navigate the offerings and vendors so that you actually can take a plan forward, that best next action? So I wanted to give you a little bit of context, okay? When you look at what makes a virtual assistant possible, you need to have some sort of conversational technology expertise, right? So when people have talked about AI, they've actually talked about natural language understanding, they've talked about conversational skills, and you'll notice that natural language processing and all of that work, way back in the 70s, was getting a lot of investment. So it's actually progressed quite a bit since then. What else do you need? You need the ability to take knowledge, and up until now, to take that knowledge meant that you had to go and talk to experts. You have to then interview those experts, get that knowledge transcoded into some form, and put it into a system. Again, that work started in the 60s and 70s and actually culminated in expert systems that did medical diagnostics, product configurations, et cetera. But we have kind of the follow-on generation from that early work in this guided help, this case-based reasoning that we've been offering now for a couple of decades. So that's here. What's recent? What's recent is that through a number of different movements, this capability of handling lots of data and extracting patterns from this lots of data using machine learning is recently becoming very, very feasible. So those 3 keys now make it possible to deliver end-to-end interactions with customers so that we can actually give this highly well-understood, high-confidence situations to a piece of technology known as a chatbot or a virtual assistant. What happens when that fails? When that fails, or when the confidence is low, you need to be able to have a backup plan so that you can actually then escalate that to a live agent and then still be able to deliver that resolution to a customer. So that end-to-end piece with the escalation is what we've been doing for a couple of decades, okay? I wanted to give you that sense, though, because in this time frame, the whole problem, the biggest problem with AI is it's rife with expectations. Some of you may know that way back in the 50s is when symbolic processing with Lisp and John McCarthy and the people at Stanford first said we could actually represent knowledge symbolically in a computer. And at that moment, it seems like, oh, wow, the future is great, we're ready to start solving all kinds of problems. But that led to a number of disappointments because the expectations were so high. And we've been through many cycles of that. It turns out that I was at Stanford in the early 80s, right about the time that there was a big hype boom. You know, the Japanese are spending $100 million with the 40 Samurai. They're investing in fifth-generation computers. And that also led to several years of disappointment when that didn't actually deliver what it really promised to deliver. If you look a few years later, in the late 90s, eGain was founded right about that time when there was another big boom. And so we had the three big companies in AI. There was Inference Corporation, there was Technology, there was IntelliCorp. They were getting lots of funding because the technology was well understood for how you interviewed experts, how you encoded that information, and how you then delivered that to customers. Well, again, we went through a little bit of a trough. And what people don't realize is that what eGain has now, at the core of it, is the IP from Inference Corporation, which is the case-based reasoning technologies that has been one of our most mature offerings now for a couple of decades. What this is another contextual timeline look at how we've used AI in serving different domains. And this is actually a system that I did way back in the 80s and 90s that helped to direct really, really expensive pieces of equipment to look for things that didn't want to be found, but that were very, very dangerous, okay? So anyway, the whole history here is one of really trying to set the expectations properly. I also wanted to give you this view, you've seen it before, which is that at the center of our offerings, underneath all of these communication channels, is the knowledge management, which Ian just spoke about, and the case-based reasoning, which you're going to hear about from Linda and others, which is that interview, that very non-scripted form of embodying knowledge so that you could actually look at various parameters of a problem and do always the next best action. The reason I wanted to also show you the slide is the number of paths through this very rich set of offerings grows. It grows exponentially, okay? So someone could start with a phone call. A few weeks later, if the issue recurs or to try to look for a follow-up action, they may get on the web, do web self-service. They may then interview an agent or chat with an agent so that they get an update on their problem. They may have emails, sending them updates from time to time. Again, they may be going back via, if you're in financial services or healthcare, using secure messaging because you can't be sending that stuff over the open web. So there's a whole plethora of channels. All of that needs to take advantage of the knowledge and case-based reasoning that is at the core of our offerings. Why do I indicate that? Because the better you understand these journeys, the better you can actually then apply your analysis to understand where to best intervene. And that intervention can then be either a live agent or it can be a well-known, very well-behaved virtual assistant that you've tailored just for that application, okay? And then, of course, we get the benefits of it by looking at the operational parameters. You then look at that, and then you take the next best action to try and improve that whole set of interventions. So very quickly, years ago, we had a very simple call center, right? So you had voice agents, and that turned out to be kind of expensive. Those of you that run voice call centers know exactly what that costs. So what you wanted to do was introduce a technology that would lower that, but at the same time still give you very high satisfaction with your customers. So you would introduce now a chat. And typically, you would have this side by side because the integration, can come later. You want to basically test it without risking the original platform. Well, once you have chat, you now realize that chat agents are no longer tied to a single customer. They can have 2, possibly 3 at the same time. That made some operational efficiencies. But in addition to that, if you now give that agent the knowledge that Ian was talking about, so the agent is always delivering high quality, very consistent results using a knowledge base. Then, of course, you're going to be improving the behavior of your, let's say, the lower third or the lowest performing of your population of agents. Now, here's the challenge. Here's where we are today, okay? We're at the stage where we know how chat works. We know what the popular questions are that people come and ask us for, okay? Remember, Ashi said, start with the questions, okay? Don't start with the answers. You want to understand the questions first. So if you do that, and if you do a good analysis of that, you can then start introducing virtual agents into this ecosystem, and you then start thinking about, well, where can I learn how to do this most effectively? The piece that we really needed in order to make this happen was to take all of this operational data, which you had from years and years of running voice and running chat, and analyzing it properly so you could do actually a good job understanding what customers are coming and asking you for. Typically, this would be like 8 to 10 very, very easy to understand, very bucketizable intents. This whole, it's almost a joke now. Password reset, that's one of the most common set of issues. But if you go into each domain now, they have their own set of very commonly asked questions. Here's the point. When you're introducing this, it seems very intuitive to go after the ones that would be most business impacting. I'm here to suggest that maybe what you want to do is look at what you can do that would get you to understand this process, to understand this practice. Because this is a new practice, okay? You need to understand the data, you need to understand where to intervene, you understand where to automate, you understand where to encode the knowledge. And by learning that and doing that quickly, learning to do that effectively, then you can attack all the other use cases and knock down those dominoes one by one. So what we're suggesting is think about going after simple cases, automate those, see how they work, learn from it. So you're doing two things. You're improving your interaction with your customers, but you're also learning this as an internal process, and you're actually training your internal staff to do this. This is one area where we will partner with you, because I'm going to tell you a story about what we've seen with one of our very recent deployments of Virtual Assistant. And now, once you've got some of that working, now you've got the Virtual Assistant able to support not just customers in their self-service, but they're still serving chat agents, and they're now also serving your voice agents. If you can make that set of investments leverageable across all three channels, then that's a good way to start introducing this into your ecosystem. Now, I also talk about AI in the sense that we have the A in front of the AI, but people often forget that. So I wanted to also introduce this notion about how you start with reasonable expectations, how you start with, let's say, minimum viable performance, and how you then nurture and grow it over time. What else do you do that with, okay? You do that with the real intelligence, okay? You do that with a real intelligent entity, and you have to sort of make sure that you understand you need patience, you need nurturing, you need learning, you need to put up with some mistakes. If you're not ready to do that, wait a little bit, or let somebody else do it. But if you're ready to do that, and you have the patience, and you want to learn how to take care of the feeding and nurturing of this, then you can put up with the fact that they start with very little knowledge, but they will grow. They will learn with time. And you have to have enough investment in there to know you're in there for the long haul. Could be a few years, could be a couple of decades, okay? Some of our most successful customers have been doing this for the better part of a decade already, and they've got phenomenal ROI numbers, NPS scores improving by 20 or 30%, training time being driven down by 40, 45%. That's what you can get if you've decided to do this seriously. So, to recap that part of the conversation, okay, you need the knowledge foundation. You need the ability to actually know when to deliver a high-quality solution, okay? That's the guided process that we've been doing now for a couple of decades. A very new component of it is the machine learning piece of it. which is taking those millions and millions of different ways of expressing your problem and understanding that you can actually come up with 8 to 12 high confidence buckets. All the other ones you can still leave for live agents. But the first 8 to 12, you can pick that off very, very quickly. The other thing, as I mentioned, is when you don't have high confidence from your intent understanding piece, the intent predictor piece, okay? You need to then escalate that to a live agent. Particularly, this is common when you have somebody saying, hey, give me a live agent, or they say something that's very unpleasant, or they use a bad word. You want to escalate those things right away. So you want to actually execute with confidence in those cases where you know that you know, okay? The other piece that really comes through here that I haven't yet spoken about, but I will later on, is this integration piece, okay? In that, if we already know a lot about the customer through the support history, or through their purchase history, or through what other information they have in their profile, then what that does is it eliminates the number of questions you need to ask. And obviously that results in the customer feeling that you know more about them, and it's less time required, possibly less repetitive, because how often have you gone on to a session, been transferred to another session, and they start asking the same questions, None of us like that experience. And then the other is this dialogue management, this piece that really understands where am I in the conversation. What does it refer to? What does previous delivery refer to? You need to be able to bind those session variables so that you actually can deliver a reasonable conversation without it looking stilted, without making it look like you just have very little state to that session. So I'm going to tell you a story, okay? And this story is one that I actually saw from very close up. And this is that in July of last year was our very first contact with this very prominent financial services company. They asked a set of questions, and after more discussions, it seemed like, this is a very challenging task. So we had some conversations around what they wanted, what they were asking for. We said, we can't really do this, but this is what we can do, okay? So that was a very good conversation, okay? We didn't just say, yes, we can do it. So out of that, we actually engaged with them, and we actually did a kickoff of the project in October. Keep in mind, this is October, actually the third week in October of 2018. In the first week of December, we actually went into user acceptance test. That's about 6 or 7 weeks. That's not a long time for most enterprise software to be understood, designed, program managed, and tested through dev, and then delivered into UAT. But this is what happened. On January 4th, we went live with this virtual agent. This is for a financial services company. They were providing it as a free service, but that free service was answering questions about a very difficult domain that most people don't want to know very much about, okay? But what it also did was it allowed the customer to say, well, I want more experience than what you are delivering to me automatically, and it also provided a way for them to actually escalate to a live person or purchase additional financial services products. That was actually huge. It was an opportunity for the company to take a free service into a paid engagement. And it reduced, of course, the phone volume that they had to deal with. And they actually needed it because it needed to go live in January. So this is a very challenging thing. So you can see that it was a VA that was very carefully scoped, and the expectations were set so that they were very realistic, so that we could actually go live in about 7 weeks of development. So what happened, okay? This is the eGain desktop that we're showing you. It showed the session, and it was initially fronted by a virtual assistant. The virtual assistant would then address the issue, and if it did not address, of course, this is then what the agent sees. The agent sees the history of the virtual agent interaction, and not only that, it brought back from the CRM system or the other customer profile information we keep, all the other information that you need to know about that customer, okay? Now, this is part of a staged engagement. The first stage was a virtual assistant. The second stage, if necessary, was a live chat. The live chat, if it was insufficient, we have another product, by the way, called co-browsing, where you can actually see the same web session. The web is basically delivering one session to the customer, and the agent is essentially looking over the shoulder of the customer. And that's this thing called co-browse. So the smooth integration from the virtual assistant into live chat, into offering a co-browse, was the range of experiences that we delivered for this customer in less than 2.5 months. So what were the results? Again, one of the things to think about is you can't think about VA in isolation. You notice that there were these other pieces we had in our solution that were able to keep the satisfaction very, very high, okay? So it was a smooth implementation. It was actually a very new experience for the agents and for the customers. And there were peak seasonal volumes that were actually handled. We're in the cloud. We can actually provision elastically all the capacity you need. And here's the main point. What we did with this enterprise was we trained their staff to take responsibility for the virtual assistant so that they could look at the exceptions. Where was the question not being answered, and immediately make that improvement. This is an engagement model that is not just us delivering you capability, right? You actually look at babies, virtual assistants, differently than you look at software, okay? If software doesn't do what you want, you can say, okay, I reject. It's not going to do the job. With babies, with virtual agents, what you want to do is start with a good base and then build that capability. Invest in that capability, feed it, okay? Watch it over time, correct its mistakes, train it, and then that's how you get a successful VA implementation, by partnering in that way, okay? But in 3 months, and this is what was actually exceeding the customer's expectations, in 3 months, those requests that came into the contact center for chatting with an agent, 50% of them, over 52% of them actually, were already resolved by the virtual agent simply because of what we were able to train it to do in that small number of months and weeks. If we could do that in a small number of weeks, and by the way, we continue to invest in this, think of what happens over a year, or 2, or 3, or 6, as in the case of some others, okay? Is that this number is going to go much higher. So that's the point, is that with a very small time window of like 2 to 3 months, if you understand your expectations and you set them appropriately, this is the kind of gain you can get. Imagine taking that number of live chat sessions completely off of your cost basis, okay? That's what we were able to do. Now, our next steps in that environment, and with our product, by the way, is to reach out into other systems of record, right? Ashu mentioned, we are not going to own everything. What we need to do is we need to manage our piece well, but then we know you have other pieces of customer profile and inventory and delivery data elsewhere in the enterprise. There will be new systems coming on board within the enterprise, as well as just stuff that's out and around, whether it's delivery data from USPS or FedEx or DHL, whether it's weather data that's affecting, whether or not there's delays. This will all make your agent, your virtual assistant, smarter. And it's obvious. It's obvious, right? Simple integrations make this intelligence of the agent, virtual agent, just increase naturally. So the integration piece, and by now, we're actually holding this very close to our core. Much of the reason why companies come to us is because we have open APIs. We know that we don't own the desktop. We know that there will be other systems that deliver, and that's why we've invested very heavily into our APIs. You can actually call our bot from your platform. We can call out to a CRM system. That is an investment we've made over the last 4 or 5 years that has really recognized that we're not the only player, but we want to play well. The next slide I'm going to introduce is a little bit more detailed way of looking at the way we think about learning. Learning is essentially trying to get you to do things, quote unquote, better, however you define better, okay? So what that needs is feedback. It needs feedback from what you've been doing. So when we introduce systems, we actually have data about how our systems are performing, right? We have operational history. It's going to come back to us in terms of metrics and reports. What we need is an ability for us to look at this and then start making tweaks. And by making those tweaks, okay, do it manually and eventually feeding it into more automated learning systems, we can then take those models and do new things. We're trying to do that every place in our architecture that has a feedback loop, okay? What is learning, really? Learning, let me just go to this slide after I've introduced this one new notion, okay? Learning, and by the way, I think a lot of people use the word agile in almost the same context, okay? It's 4 elements. It's what is working, and that I should continue doing. What is not working, and I should stop doing, okay? What is not working, I should start doing. I should try doing something new. But the 4th is almost the most important, is what do I not yet understand? And by saying I explicitly do not understand something, it means that I can just put this off for now and focus just on where I can make little tweaks. Start with little tweaks. What's working, what's not working, what should I start doing? And then, as you go through each learning iteration, address more and more from that roadmap. So I'm going to share with you now a few things. By the way, when I had this conversation with this company-wide team that I am representing here, we have so much experience in the 2 decades that we've been doing this that it was difficult, but I just picked 10 lessons here that show that, you know, some of these things are intuitive, some are actually not that intuitive, okay? The first thing I'd like to start with is data is everything, okay? Yeah, it sounds simple, but early on, let's say a couple decades ago, you weren't looking at the data. You were looking at experts. Experts that had information in their brain was where you needed to go to try and figure out what you needed to automate. Well, experts essentially got that understanding by looking at lots of experience, lots of operational experience. Well, right now, because so much of the operations is now in digital channels, we have the data underneath it. You don't have to necessarily go to an expert's brain where they may have recall issues, they may have bias issues, they may have turf issues, okay? They may have, job security issues. So interviewing experts is an art. You no longer have to interview experts. You can go straight to the data. Through analytics, through ML, through reporting, that's really where you want to start, okay? If you don't start there, start with your experts, but pretty soon I think you want to get into the data. The second is the theme that I introduced before. Often you go into acquiring software by saying, where's the biggest business impact going to be, okay? I am here to suggest, where is it where you can actually learn this process and practice this process and go through iterations of it as quickly as possible and learn as much as possible? That may not be the most important thing, but if you do that right, if you do the simple use case right, you will be able to get to that business impacting use case. But by the time you get to that business impacting use case, you'll be an expert in how to do this. So that's why I suggest doing it simple first. The third is partner in agility. And this is why I'm here to say eGain does want to be your partner. We do want to actually practice those 4 questions that I did just go through, okay? What are you doing? What do you want to continue doing? What do you want to start doing? What do you want to stop doing? And what do you want to park for a future iteration, okay? We want to partner with you in that agility because we know our product. We've been doing this for 2 decades. And we want to know your domain. We want to know your use cases. And by putting all of that expertise together in a single team and working side by side, that's how I think we're going to get to deliver these kinds of systems in 7 weeks, okay? Be specific and precise in response. Okay, so this was a lesson that we learned by trying to answer questions a bit too well, okay? So in other words, our early versions of this would identify a problem, immediately know what the solution is, and the bot would put up, let's say, 3 paragraphs to tell you exactly what to do. That's not the most conversational style. If you really want to actually behave like a human entity, you want to take those 3 paragraphs and feed it to the customer in chunks, easily understandable, and you don't want to do it in 5 milliseconds. You want to sort of give them time to digest what's going on with that interaction. It's more conversational. It's more understanding. It's more empathetic. You're not throwing a lot of data at the customer at the one time. No one in the VA is not confident. So what I'm saying is, and I alluded to this earlier, was when we go through this intent prediction, this intent classification by looking at millions and millions of requests and search terms, by the time you've done the right training, you have either high confidence in knowing what the customer wants, or you have low confidence, or you have medium confidence, okay? That's very important. When you have low confidence, this is when you want to take it to a live agent. When you have high confidence, you can actually take it directly to a guided process, or a wizard, or case-based, whatever term you want to use. But in this gray area where you have medium confidence, this is where you want to be smart in interacting with a customer or getting more clarifying responses, or you may actually immediately then escalate to a live agent. So know, this is very important, know when you have high confidence in your machine learning, in your intent prediction. Connecting the intent with solution. This gets back to Ashu's earlier point about looking at the questions first. Okay? We now have the means to do this end-to-end. You notice that 2 decades ago, we had this case-based reasoning system, and it was working very well if you could actually extract the right questions, the right knowledge, the right business process from your experts. 10 years ago, we acquired some chatbot technology. We actually did then do some smart dialogue management, contextual dialogue management. Now, 10 years later, we now have the ability to inject this machine learning, this intent prediction piece. So now we have this end-to-end model. You can now take what the customer is asking you, understand it, ask questions about it, clarifying questions, and actually plug in other information from the enterprise if you need to, and then feed that into the case-based reasoning system so you can actually go directly from the query to the solution. It's a pretty exciting time for eGain because this, with version 17, is where we can actually do this end-to-end now. This next point about transferring seamlessly, not only do you want to recognize when you have low confidence and then feed that to a live agent, but when the live agent has now clarified what the customer really needs, then to say, well, I've already got this guided process. It really knows how to handle, password reset, or it already knows how to handle a return, or it already knows how to answer this particular tax question. So being able to transfer that session from a live interaction to this guided process seamlessly, but with the agent still overseeing what the virtual agent is doing, and assisting one of our customers coming back with another question. This is a bidirectional transference that we also, sorry, I went back one slide too far. This is an ability to deliver a better experience. Again, you don't want to just hand it off to a virtual assistant and forget it, right? This next point was kind of interesting, okay? In that, even though we advise our customers to be very clear when you're delivering a live experience to an agent, to a customer, or a bot or a virtual assistant experience to a customer, still some customers don't really get it, okay? So if they're interacting with a virtual assistant, thinking that it's a live agent, that's when we see some irritability and some words appear in the session that suggest that you may want to take that out of the bot mode and into a live agent, simply because the customer's been confused. So even though we advise it, how you design your UI, how you design your entry point, how you actually greet the customer with explanatory text, that's actually very influential in the experience of the customer. This baby notion is the one that is next. Invest. Okay? In other words, the launch of a VA is only the starting point. Okay? You want to continue watching its behavior. You want to look at the operational data. You want to look at your reports. You want to take those 8 or 9 or 10 classifications, increase the confidence, decrease the error, but then possibly start doing more and more possible resolution categories. And that's only possible if you say, take investment mindset. You go into this knowing that you're going to start and you're going to keep making this thing better. This last point is one that I think it's probably the most salesy point in my entire deck, is that we've been through this. And we've actually learned quite a bit from doing this. And Ashu offered each of you the opportunity to try our products. This VA thing, you actually get to build one later today if you signed up for the workshop. And even beyond that, you'll actually see it working. You can actually then decide, how you want to proceed with it. But if you actually get into an engagement with us, get into a conversation. We're going to tell you whether or not we think it's one that we're likely to be successful in, because we're going to take the risk. You to take no financial risk in this. We're going to take 30 days, and hopefully with some of your data cleansed, obviously. And we will show or not show what is possible using that data. And then you get to decide in 30 days whether it's something you want to take for the very next step. We're trying to introduce this because this is a very new area. Not many of you may have deployed virtual assistants. Actually, how many of you actually have chatbots today? Anybody? Good. Okay? So some of you are familiar with this, but not most. So those of you that don't, let us take the risk. Okay? And then we can either perform as we say we can, or we'll talk again in several months, when you've actually, figured out that, hey, there's another small segment of the problem that may be applicable to us. Come and talk to us then also, okay? So the message here is, I'm trying to indicate that we've had, by the way, these are, as I say, 10 out of maybe 30 or 40 nuggets that I could have introduced. I didn't want to go too deep into this, because if you want the rest of it, we can have that conversation. But I want to give you enough to know that we've been in this game. We've seen a few of these virtual assistants being born. And we invite you to consider it, whether it would actually make a difference for your business. And the point being, take advantage of this, and let's make some babies. Okay? All right? Thank you.